You may know that I have largely avoided tweeting and talking about 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, who's now world famous as a climate change advocate. But there are two things you don't want to rely on when you're trying to tell who's telling the truth and who's credible on climate change. Number one would be a child, right? We were all children. We can all compare how much we knew when we were 16 to how much we know now. It's not the same, is it? 16-year-olds have partially developed brains, all of them. Secondly, if the specific problem is you're trying to figure out which group of disagreeing people to believe, I'm not sure you want to go with the non-neurotypical opinion on that. So I wrote a blog post. You can see it in my Twitter feed somewhere near the top. It should probably be in the top 10 at this point. It's getting pushed down a little bit. But it looks like it's going semi-viral, which is good. And what people are saying is that, well, a lot of people are saying it's the best thing I've written, and it's wonderful, and they're tweeting it around, and I like all that. But I think that I accidentally wrote something for adults by trying to write something for children. Because what I was trying to do is break down the situation, climate change was the topic, and the risks of it, into the simplest, quick statements about a number of topics, from, the new technology being less risky to, there's not a big problem with waste, to economics and stuff. I tried to keep it as simple as possible. But there is sort of a natural limit to how simple you can get on that kind of a topic. You can simplify to the point of being ridiculous and nobody learns anything. So I simplified as much as I could, trying to make it sort of a 14 and older thing, but not every 14-year-old, sort of the Greta Thunberg type of, 14 and over, in the sense that she's part of the, I assume, one of the smarter kids. So I was trying to write something for the smarter kids and maybe something that the adults could read to them. But I think I missed my mark because a lot of adults were noting that it seemed perfect for them. So that's a good lesson. There's no limit to how simple you can make writing. Well, there is a limit. I mean, you could simplify it to the point where it's just inaccurate, but just simpler is better. It's just there just is no way around that when it comes to writing. If you can simplify it without losing its point, do it. Now, you may know that I have largely avoided tweeting and talking about 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, who's now world famous as a climate change advocate. Now, partly because she's a kid. And I'm an adult. And I just don't feel comfortable talking about a kid, especially in this context, because I wouldn't be able to criticize her in the normal way you would criticize an adult, and therefore it's just not productive to bring her into the conversation. Secondly, I didn't realize until just this morning that she's talked publicly about her Asperger's and has noted that she considers it sort of a superpower, because one of the aspects of that is it allows you to dig more deeply into a topic, which she's done. Now, I probably have more experience with non-neurotypical folks, Asperger's being the more common name for that, than most people. Probably a solid 20% of my fan base is on the spectrum somewhere. When I go to do events, I am surrounded by non-neurotypical people, and I love them. I absolutely love the Asperger's, the non-neurotypical people. Trust me when I say that. It's a community which I have special affection for because they have many delightful qualities which you cannot overlook. One is that they have a hard time telling a lie. If you're on the spectrum, if you're like Greta, you have Asperger's, you're non-neurotypical. I think I prefer that. I like the neurotypical for the common folks, people like me, and I like non-neurotypical for that community. I just like that term better. But they do have some superpowers. So when she talks about that, that's not even an exaggeration compared to us. Her ability to dig deep and concentrate is probably pretty awesome. Likewise, they have a quality which they tend to be brutally honest, just brutally honest. I like that. I mean, it can be painful, can be a challenge, but I kind of like it, right? There's something you can respect about that. So I'm a big fan of the non-neurotypical environment, and to be fair, they're big fans of Dilbert quite often. And so it's a mutual love. So I have a special affection for Greta that many of you do not share. So let me start with that. So I have an affection for her because she's a child. She means well. And I believe that everything that she says, partly because of the, non-neurotypical element, I believe she's an honest player. Now, honest doesn't mean right, of course, but I believe that it's almost incapable for her to be dishonest because that's part of her superpower. But let me complete the thought here, because she's like a lawyer at trial. She has introduced this variable into the topic. It's not anything I would have ever introduced into a topic, but she did, and quite rightfully calls it a superpower. So as long as we keep our heads on straight, I think we can talk honestly about this because she does, and I think that's fair. She would probably appreciate it. But here's the thing that has to be said. Greta is not a scientist. She is a person who has done a lot of reading, and she has developed a point of view that is not so much based on the science she's done, because she hasn't done science, but rather her ability to trust some people over others. And one of the elements of being non-neurotypical is a little extra difficulty reading people. That's almost, it's very much part of the definition of what it's like to be non-neurotypical. Because the neurotypicals can look at other neurotypicals and say, well, you're probably thinking and acting the way I would. So that gives you a little insight. You're like, well, if I would have flinched, then I see you flinching, that probably means something. If I would have grimaced then and I see you grimace, that probably means something. Because if I were grimacing, and I see that grimace. So and it has to be said. It just has to be said, because it's now introduced into evidence. This is nothing I would have talked about, except that it's already introduced into our conversation. But there are two things you don't want to rely on when you're trying to tell who's telling the truth and who's credible on climate change. Number one would be a child, right? We were all children. We can all compare how much we knew when we were 16 to how much we know now. It's not the same, is it? 16-year-olds have partially developed brains, all of them. I'm not talking about Greta, I'm talking about all children. Scientifically, conclusively, they have undeveloped brains. So the first thing you should not pay attention to is someone whose science has conclusively, there's no question about this, there's nobody on the other side of what I'm going to say, their brains are partially developed. Secondly, if the specific problem is you're trying to figure out which group of disagreeing people to believe, I'm not sure you want to go with the non-neurotypical opinion on that. Because the non-neurotypical should, just by definition of what that means to be non-neurotypical. Here, I don't mean this as an insult. Remember, I have great affection for this community, as tend to be big Dilbert fans, and I love them a lot. Spend tons of time with non-neurotypical people, and I can say I enjoy it pretty much every time. Um, you have to say, and I think the community would say this of themselves, that one of their challenges is reading people. So they can't tell when you're lying as well as they would like to. And they're a little bit distrustful of things that they should not be distrustful of. Because they're just, that's the one thing where their superpower doesn't work. It's sort of like their kryptonite. So I would agree with Greta, who says it's like she has a superpower with her Asperger's. That's a real thing. I believe that her power to concentrate and focus is powerful, and I'm glad she recognizes it and uses it.